The battlefield was silent, too silent for France. The fields that once echoed with the proud thunder of French cavalry now lay littered with the bones of dead knights, their banners trampled into the mud. For decades, England's deadly longbowmen had turned the flower of French chivalry into corpses. Crécy, Poitiers, Agincourt, names that haunted every French soldier, whispered like curses in the wind. But on this morning, the silence was not defeat. It was the deep, suffocating calm that comes before a storm of vengeance. The year was 1450. After more than 100 years of war, the tide had finally begun to turn. The French were no longer the disorganized, pride-blinded nobles of old. A new army had risen, trained, disciplined, and burning with hatred for what the English had done to their homeland. At the heart of it all stood Charles VII of France, the once ignored dauphin who had watched his kingdom burn. Now he was king, and his heart beat with quiet fury. He remembered the tales of his ancestors' humiliation. At Crécy, thousands of armored knights were cut down by peasants wielding longbows. At Agincourt, English arrows fell like black rain, slaughtering French nobility knee-deep in mud. Every generation of English archers had carved their legacy into France's flesh, but no more. The French king's new commanders had studied the English tactics. They had learned to fight not with blind honor, but with cold calculation. Artillery, primitive but deadly, had begun to change the rules of war. Cannons could tear through wooden defenses, scatter ranks, and silence the laughter of archers who once mocked charging knights. And then there was Thomas Curiel, the English commander. He had landed with his army at Cherbourg, confident and bold. He marched through Normandy, plundering villages, confident that his archers would once again bring him victory. The English soldiers sang songs of Agincourt as they burned French farms. They had no idea that they were walking straight into a trap. It was near a small village called Formigny, where fate would finally balance the scales. The morning sun rose over the rolling Norman countryside, painting the fields gold. From a hill, French scouts spotted the English column moving slowly, their banners fluttering red and white. They numbered around 3,500 men, many of them longbowmen veterans of old campaigns. Their bows were taller than a man, their arrows sharpened to pierce armor, and in their confidence unshakable. But the French army waiting ahead was not the one their fathers had faced. At its head stood Jean de Bourbon, Count of Clermont, a hardened commander who had studied English methods and was determined to destroy them. Alongside him, Arthur de Richemont, the Constable of France, a brutal and relentless soldier who knew no fear. As the French assembled, Clermont's cannons were rolled into position. Iron monsters, their barrels blackened by powder. They pointed toward the approaching English like waiting dragons. When the English army finally appeared, they took defensive positions behind a hedge-lined road, planting their sharpened stakes before them, the same trick they had used at Agincourt and Crécy. Longbowmen hammered the stakes into the ground, ready to repel a cavalry charge. The English commander smirked. "Let them come," he told his men. "We've seen this play before." But the French didn't charge. For hours they waited. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of damp earth and sweat. Then suddenly, the roar of French cannons shattered the stillness. The ground trembled as the first volley of iron balls screamed through the air, smashing into the English lines. Stakes shattered. Men screamed. The longbowmen, stunned and disoriented, tried to return fire, but their arrows fell short. The distance was too great, and the French artillery too accurate. It was the first time many Englishmen had ever faced cannons in open battle, and the terror was indescribable. Still. Thomas Curiel refused to retreat. "Advance!" he shouted. His men surged forward to silence the guns. They crossed the field, arrows whistling as they closed the gap. The longbowmen took aim and fired thousands of arrows arching into the sky like a black cloud. The French gunners fell, impaled or screaming. For a brief, brutal moment, it seemed the old magic had returned. Asterisk, the longbowmen broke through and captured the cannons. They cheered as they turned them toward the French, but they didn't know how to use them. The victory was only momentary and deadly. Asterisk, because, from the west, Richemont's army was approaching. Asterisk, the Constable of France had been marching swiftly to join Clermont, and now his troops appeared like ghosts from the dust. The English, trapped between two French forces, realized too late what had happened. The trap had closed. The cannons roared again, this time from both sides. Smoke filled the air. The screams of men and horses blended with the thunder of iron. French knights, armored head to toe, began their advance, not in blind rage, but in grim, methodical silence. Step by step, they moved forward, their lances lowered, their visors down. Asterisk, the English longbowmen tried to fall back and regroup, but the field offered no escape. The hedges that had once protected them now boxed them in. The French cavalry crashed into them like a wave of steel. Asterisk, remember Agincourt? Richemont bellowed as his sword cut through the smoke. Remember our dead. Asterisk, the longbowmen fought desperately, their daggers drawn, but they were overwhelmed. The power of the bow was useless when knights were among them, slashing, crushing, trampling. For every arrow loosed, 10 French blades answered. The English formation disintegrated. Panic spread like wildfire. Those who tried to flee were cut down from behind. Those who stayed were crushed under horses. The field that once might have been another English triumph became a nightmare of vengeance. Asterisk, by noon, the battle was over. Asterisk, bodies littered the ground, thousands of them. The hedges were splattered with blood, the cannons still smoking. Thomas Kyriel, the proud English commander, was taken prisoner. For France, it was not just a victory. It was retribution. Asterisk, for the first time in more than a century, French knights stood over the broken corpses of English longbowmen and felt the weight of centuries lift. Asterisk, Clermont removed his helmet, his face blackened by powder smoke. He looked across the field where so many had died and whispered, "This is for Crécy, for Poitiers, for Agincourt." Asterisk, the long shadow of the English longbow had finally been broken, but the story did not end there, because while the Battle of Formigny marked the beginning of the end, vengeance is a fire that burns far beyond victory. And the French knights were not done. Asterisk, they wanted to erase every trace of the English from their soil. They wanted to crush the pride that had humiliated them for generations. Asterisk, in the months that followed, that vengeance would turn even darker. As the French hunted the remnants of the English army through the valleys and villages of Normandy, showing no mercy, no chivalry, only the cold justice of revenge. The age of the longbow was dying. The age of gunpowder, iron, and ruthless modern warfare had begun. The smoke of Formigny had barely drifted away when the true storm began. Asterisk, across Normandy, word spread like wildfire, the English are broken. Villagers who had once cowered in silence now cheered in the streets. Church bells rang as far as Rouen and Caen. For the first time in living memory, France could breathe. But among the soldiers who had fought that day, the taste of victory was mixed with something darker, something that had been festering for generations. Revenge. The French knights had not forgotten the humiliation of their fathers and grandfathers. Crécy, where arrows had cut down the flower of French nobility. Poitiers, where their king had been captured like a common criminal. Agincourt, where the mud had been red with the blood of princes. For over 100 years, English longbowmen had slaughtered French knights from a distance, laughing as armor turned useless under the hail of ashwood shafts. Asterisk, but at Formigny, the balance of power had shifted. The French had discovered a new weapon, gunpowder, and with it, a new kind of war. The longbow, once the terror of Europe, was now just wood and string before the thunder of iron cannons. Asterisk, and now, the knights wanted to make the English feel what they had endured. Asterisk, under the command of the relentless Arthur de Richemont, the French army swept through Normandy like a tide of iron and fire. Every village that had harbored English soldiers, every castle that had flown the Red Cross of St. George, became a target. The English garrisons, once confident behind their walls, now trembled. They knew what was coming. In Caen, English soldiers had fortified the great stone castle, hoping to hold until reinforcements came from across the channel. But none would come. England was fractured by civil strife. The Wars of the Roses had begun to tear it apart. The Longbowmen who had once stood proud beneath Henry V's banners were gone, replaced by confused, exhausted men who fought more for survival than glory. The French surrounded Caen, their cannons pounding day and night. The sound was unrelenting, like the beating heart of vengeance itself. The walls cracked, fires burned, and the cries of the defenders echoed into the night. When the gates finally fell, there was no mercy. The knights who entered the city did not come to negotiate. They came to cleanse. The Longbowmen who had once rained death on their ancestors were dragged into the streets, stripped of their armor, and paraded before the citizens they had once oppressed. Some begged for their lives. Others spat defiance until the end. But the French had no forgiveness left to give. Richemont, grim-faced and unyielding, ordered the executions to be swift. "Let no English arrow ever be loosed again upon French soil," he declared. And his men obeyed. Across Normandy, this scene repeated itself again and again. In Bayeux, in Falaise, in Avranches, English garrisons fell one after another. The French knights, their armor gleaming beneath the banners of fleur-de-lis, rode through the streets like avenging angels. Every arrow pit they found was filled in with the corpses of those who had once used it. And yet, amid the blood and vengeance, there was something deeper stirring within the French, a realization that they had changed. The age of the knightly duel was over. The codes of chivalry, the rules of gallant combat and honor were dying alongside the Longbowmen. It was not a war of nobles anymore. It was total war. The people of Normandy, long crushed under English taxes and occupation, rose up to join their liberators. Farmers armed with scythes and pitchforks hunted down stragglers. Women who had lost husbands and sons to English raids turned informers, guiding French patrols to hidden camps and supply wagons. For decades, France had been a patchwork of ruin and despair. Now it was awakening with righteous fury. The English, once so sure of their dominance, found themselves hunted, starving, and abandoned. They had ruled French lands for so long that they had forgotten what it meant to fight for survival. One English soldier wrote in his final letter home, "The French are not men, they are devils cloaked in steel. They give no quarter. Their eyes burn with the ghosts of their slain." That letter was found months later on his corpse, lying in a ditch outside Coutances. Meanwhile, in the royal court at Chinon, King Charles VII received the news with quiet satisfaction. He had waited his entire reign for this moment. The humiliation of Agincourt had haunted him since his youth. Now he had erased it in fire and blood. "The long shadow of the English has finally lifted," he told his advisors. But even he could sense that something in the soul of France had changed forever. At Rouen, the largest English stronghold in Normandy, the siege lasted for weeks. The city that had once witnessed the burning of Joan of Arc now trembled under the roar of French artillery. Cannonballs smashed through towers that had stood for centuries. Inside the city, English morale crumbled. Food ran out. Disease spread. The proud Longbowmen who had once mocked death now prayed for a rescue that would never come. When the French broke through, the massacre was swift. Knights led the charge through the smoking ruins, cutting down any who resisted. Some English soldiers tried to surrender, but the memory of Agincourt was still too fresh in every French mind. They were shown no mercy. And yet, amid the chaos, one English archer, a veteran of a dozen campaigns, was captured alive. Richemont himself questioned him. "Tell me," the constable asked, his voice cold and measured. Did you fight at Agincourt? Asterisk, the man, defiant to the end, raised his head. Aye, he said, and I remember your kind crawling through the mud as we rained arrows upon you. Asterisk Richemont stared at him for a long moment. Then he turned away and said simply, Then you shall remember how it feels to be beneath our feet. The archer was executed at dawn. With Roland's fall, the English hold on northern France disintegrated. Their armies fled toward the coast, desperate to reach their ships. But the French knights were relentless. Every retreating column was ambushed. Every bridge was burned. The same hedges and fields that had once sheltered longbowmen now became their graves. Asterisk at Cherbourg, the last English garrison in Normandy, stood defiant. But the French brought their full might to bear hundreds of cannons, thousands of soldiers. The siege was merciless. Asterisk when the English finally surrendered in August 1450. The French banners flew across every tower. The 100 Years' War, though not yet fully over, was effectively decided. The English were driven back across the Channel, never to return as conquerors again. Asterisk, and for the French knights, it was more than victory. It was vindication. Asterisk in the aftermath, many chroniclers wrote of the transformation that had taken place. The proud knights who had once died charging into arrow storms had learned patience, discipline, and strategy. They had embraced gunpowder, artillery, and coordinated tactics. They had become something new, something far more dangerous. Asterisk the age of the English. Longbowmen had ended in a roar of cannon fire and vengeance. Asterisk yet, in quiet moments, some French soldiers confessed that victory had not brought them peace. They had avenged their fathers, but in doing so, they had also buried the old ideals of chivalry. Asterisk, one knight wrote in his diary, We have won, but I fear we have killed the soul of knighthood. The bow humbled us, but the cannon has made us monsters. Asterisk still, France had risen from ashes. Its lands reclaimed, its honor restored, its enemies broken. And from the ruins of the 100 Years' War, a new world was born, a world of kings and cannons, nations and gunpowder, where distance and nobility no longer guaranteed victory. Asterisk the French knights, once symbols of pride and arrogance, had learned their greatest lesson not from triumph, but from defeat. Asterisk and in their brutal revenge. They had closed one of the bloodiest chapters in medieval history. Asterisk as dawn broke over the fields of Normandy, a single French banner fluttered in the wind, blue and gold, shining in the sunlight. The longbowmen were gone, their legends buried beneath the thunder of a new age. Asterisk, but their ghosts lingered, whispering across the hills where so many had died. Asterisk, for though the French had finally defeated them, history would never forget the fear they once inspired. Asterisk, and as time moved on, one truth would echo across centuries. Arrows may have won battles, but cannons changed the world.